we're going to start with the news that affects your money. This is the headlines that really should be getting more attention. I understand there's not like a sexy angle to this. There's no flipping puppy dogs or pretty girls or anything salacious in this. But this is the stuff that affects your wallet, your pocketbook. Does it get more important than that? It shouldn't. And so you heard some of the rundown there in the top of the hour news. But let me expand on that, because the stock market's actually having a great day today. Stock market's going up, and it's not taking off like a rocket ship, but it's interesting to see how it reacts to yesterday's number. On top of that, it's a new month, so it's a great start to May. But I guess they weren't too shook by yesterday's negative GDP number. If you missed yesterday's show, we have the numbers come in for the first quarter GDP growth, gross domestic product growth, and it was negative, but it was 0.3, so not a whole lot, and not anything giant, big, or down. It's kind of treading water here. And that's not too far out of expectations, even for the optimists out there. There's a lot of transition and a lot of changes that happen in that first quarter from January to March. I think the more interesting number is going to see what happens with the second quarter, because it includes April. When the tariff started, when the downturn started, we went into correction territory, I guess almost bear territory in the NASDAQ. But we're already bouncing back from that. And we're recovered most of it. But apparently, no, they weren't too shocked by yesterday's GDP number. Maybe that was already priced in. I mean, that's one of the obvious things you can infer from that. You heard in the top of the hour news break, GM said they're going to eat the cost of tariffs. And the number she said was $4 to $5 billion. So, yeah, $5 billion's on the high end. But I think that's an interesting take, because that was from Mary Barra. She's the CEO of GM. She was on Maria Bartiromo's show this morning, watched the whole 13 minutes. And, I have a little bit more nuanced takeaway from that. GM, are you really planning on just eating up to $5 billion in costs and not passing it down or raising your prices or making any cutbacks? Or do you expect this tariff stuff to be resolved fairly soon, and you don't want to make any moves because if tariffs go away next week and you've already raised your prices, what are you going to have to do, lower them again? So then you look like a fool. No, I think this is a person who doesn't expect the tariff issue to remain in place for over the year, probably for over the next 6 months. You would not voluntarily go into a bandsaw of a $5 billion loss face first like this if you thought that's how it was really going to work out. And if you did, you might be unseated by your shareholders coming up in the next meeting. But that's interesting. Another one that I like to watch this kind of under the radar here. This is a good bellwether of the economy. Americans are spending less on fast food. Now, McDonald's had to announce their earnings yesterday. They did the conference call, and the spokesman from McDonald's, what was this guy's name? He had a wild name, Kipzinski. He said they're down 1% in the first quarter, McDonald's. But check this out. If you break it down by the poorest among us, they call them low-income consumers, they were down nearly double digits. Middle-income fast food eaters were down nearly as much. However, traffic growth from the high-income consumers was up. So that's a great way to tell you how people are really processing the economy. If poor people are like, I can't even afford McDonald's, I better just eat out the house. It's the difference between going to Jack in the Box and eating a ham sandwich out of your own kitchen. But for rich people, high-income consumers, they have a different choice. They're like, am I going to go to a nice sit-down restaurant with a cloth, with tablecloths, and the guy comes out and he brings the wine? Am I going to go to a place that has the special scoopers for my breadcrumbs before my meal gets there? That's when you know you're... Garrett, have you ever even been to the restaurant with the breadcrumb scoopers? Because I didn't go to one of those until I was like 29, maybe a long time ago. Yeah, you hadn't got the bill for one of those. So they go from the breadcrumb scooper high end. They're like, you know what? I'm just gonna bite the bullet and go get some Whataburger or Taco Cabana or something like that. So you can see people's expectation, even though we haven't had mass layoffs, even though unemployment is about where it's been this entire time, people are adjusting their behaviors. And this is where it shows up, whether you actually have the firings or not. So I think that's a great look. People are uncertain. They're changing their behaviors. They're kind of buckling down. And that doesn't necessarily mean the economy's bad, but that does mean a lot of people think the economy could be bad sometime in the near future. Now, mortgage rates are a bright spot. They've fallen for 2 straight weeks. But the bigger part of this is they've kind of been on a downward trend since about a year ago. Right now, the 30-year fixed mortgage, as of yesterday, fell to 6.76, according to Freddie Mac. The important number is that a year ago, the exact same 30-year loan was 7.22%. Doesn't sound like a big change here, but depending on the size of your house, that could be a couple $100 a month off of your mortgage payment. So these are some big changes. We also have some fantastic or promising sounding updates on a mineral deal between the U.S. and Ukraine. Also, Russia and Ukraine sound like these kids are about ready to settle down and figure it out. The tariff exemptions that have been sort of scalpeled into the current regime have a lot of people feeling a little bit better, especially about high-ticket items, airplanes, cars, things like that. But a guy who's going to help me break it down even further and let you know about all the headlines and stories that are affecting your money right now, E.J. Antoni from the Heritage Foundation is going to join us in the next segment and continue talking about the headlines that affect your pocketbook. Well, I knew we were going to have E.J. Antoni from the Heritage Foundation on the show today, so I started typing out questions that I would like to ask him. You know, he's the economic guru over there. And my list is so long, I don't think we can squeeze it into 2 segments, so let's just run right into it. Welcome back, E.J. Antoni. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Let's do rapid fire. Here we go. Let's get through them all.
Okay, first, stock market seems to be having a good day. Good start to May. I guess they weren't too shook by yesterday's negative GDP number, E.J.
No, exactly. And not only that, but there's so much of what these companies are going to earn in the future, which is what justifies their stock price. So much of that is still left to be decided until this 90-day pause is expired. So we basically are in a holding pattern right now. Markets are looking for direction, and a lot of this economic data we're getting right now is very noisy because of the tariff fight. In other words, it's not sending a clear indication of whether the economy is going up or down in the first place. So it's not like you can make definitive moves today in terms of your portfolio.
Well, and that's the thing I've been stressing. It's so hard on radio. You have a tendency to want to say everything's great or everything's terrible or this is the best in the world or this is the worst in the world. And it's been really hard to come out here and try and be opinionated on nobody really knows what this is going to look like in 6 months or even 3 months.
It's exactly right. I mean, nobody knows what it's going to be like in 3 weeks, let alone 3 months. Look at where the market was just a couple of weeks ago compared to where it is today. I mean, April was one of the most volatile months on record. A lot of that was because they rolled out the tariffs in frankly, a very botched way. It did not have to be that bad. But whatever the case, they are well on their way to correcting it, I think, and to getting some good trade deals signed for the U.S. It looks like we'll probably get a deal inked with India if they can stay out of war with Pakistan sometime in the next week or two. So that's a very, very positive development. Same thing with Japan. We're getting closer to a deal with them. I would not be surprised if Australia is the next domino to fall after that.
Well, look, even if we do get some good announcements in the next month or so, we're a good third of the way through the second quarter. And if this comes back as a negative GDP number, we will click the layman's definition of a recession. So, E.J. Antoni, Heritage Foundation, are we in a recession right now and we just don't know it?
Well, okay, let's distinguish between a recession on paper and an actual recession. In other words, the difference between the rhetoric and the reality. If we polled people during the Biden administration, especially the second half, do you think the economy's in recession? More than half of the folks would routinely say yes. And the reason was that their own personal financial situation was going backwards. It was receding, hence recession. If you look at how much could the average American family actually buy with their weekly paycheck, for instance, that declined. It dropped about 4% over the course of the Biden administration. So again, if you want to talk about how are people actually doing, that's what I really care about. How are Americans doing? What can they actually buy with their incomes? Those figures are pretty lousy. By that metric, we've been in recession for quite a while. And let's not forget that during the Biden administration was the first half of 2022, they had 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, and they simply said, oh, no, we're still adding jobs, so it's not a recession. Okay, so apparently these definitions don't mean anything anymore.
Right.
And again, what I'm really ultimately concerned about is how is the average American actually doing? What is their standard of living and what is their cost of living? That's what I want to see improved. And whatever the so-called official metrics say, other than that, I don't really care at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, right before you came on the show, I was trying to illustrate that with another piece of news that came out this morning, or no, yesterday. McDonald's said they had a 1% dip in their first quarter revenue. And so they were saying that lower income people and middle income people are going out to eat less at fast food, but higher income people are eating more fast food because it's a cheaper alternative to the more expensive options here. So I think a lot of people are already making adjustments, even though the numbers haven't really gone that haywire. I think a lot of people are expecting things to be worse than they are.
Right. And the other thing to remember is that so much of what was done during the Biden administration was artificially increasing these different economic metrics, things like GDP or the jobs numbers. So when the government goes out and spends a ton of money, what does that do to GDP? It makes it skyrocket. That's what happened under Biden. And same thing when the government goes out and hires a bunch of people to do useless work in quotes there. What happens to the jobs numbers? Well, they look great because you're adding all these jobs. Now, you're not adding anything productive to the private sector of the economy. You're just adding bureaucratic bloat, but it makes the statistics look good. So as Trump reduces government spending, which is what happened in the first quarter, not only did the growth of government spending stop, but government spending actually went down in the first quarter. Well, that drags down GDP. Likewise, they've been laying off workers, especially at the federal level. What is that doing to the jobs numbers? It's reducing them as well. So what the kinds of economic sugar highs that the Biden administration kept producing for us for 4 years are all being undone. And you might say, as we start to sober up, that's the path to health now, but it is going to make some of these numbers look bad, at least in the short run.
Yeah, it's like when your Red Bull wears off. But you had mentioned the deficit and the debt. I was under the impression they had extended the exact same spending levels under Biden's last continuing resolution through this new continuing resolution, and that's going to keep them at that level until the end of September, end of the fiscal year. Are we actually going to see a reduction in the deficit?
Well, we're actually already seeing it. In the first quarter, they managed to save billions of dollars almost exclusively because of DOGE. I think they literally accounted for like 99% of the savings that the Trump administration was able to identify in their first 3 months. Well, really their first 2.5 months.
Well, hang on. E.J. Antoni from Heritage Foundation. I was under the impression that would have to be codified into law by congressional action, and those checks have already been written and that money's already been spent.
It depends entirely on which specific ones we're talking about. In certain cases, they essentially, the government is, this sounds stupid, but the government is actually required to spend money on certain things unless Congress changes a previous law, even if the government, let's say, can complete a project for less. But in other instances, DOGE has been able to actually claw back some money, whether it had already gone out the door or at least stop money before it went out the door. And in those specific instances where you did not require any kind of congressional approval, there has just been pure savings.
All right, E.J. Antoni, when we get back, I want to play you a clip from Mary Barra, the GM CEO. But the ultimate question is the price of our cars about to get more expensive? Because when they did the blanket tariffs, the easy answer to that was, well, if they stay on, then yes. But we've gotten so many carve-outs and so many exceptions that it's kind of muddied the picture. And then you have Mary Barra saying, nah, we're just going to eat the difference. I'm going to ask E.J. Antoni from the Heritage Foundation next, and you'll hear his answer. Are your cars going to be more expensive in the near term? Continuing with E.J. Antoni. Thank you for sticking with us for another segment here. I don't mean to take up half your day, but I want to look at sort of monetary policy here, because we had ended the last talk about the deficit, which really, my big concern and the reason I focus on that so much is I find that to be sort of the ground zero for inflation. We are not going to get inflation under control if we can't get the deficit under control. And I don't hear a whole lot of people worried about inflation in D.C.
Oh, goodness, I couldn't agree with you more. But see, this is where I was so glad to see the latest inflation numbers from the month of March, because although we had really bad inflation at the start of the first quarter, by the end of the quarter, inflation had gone away. It was literally down to zero. Now, that doesn't mean all of a sudden prices have dropped back down. It just means they've stopped going up. But that's the first step to actually getting them to eventually go back down. Now, to do that, you're going to need, tighter monetary policy. You're going to need an explosion of energy production. You're going to need permitting reform to make all that happen. And yes, absolutely, you're going to need spending cuts on the part of the government. Fortunately, we're already getting all of that. Maybe not as much as we need to, but we are at least getting it to some degree. Again, like we mentioned in the first segment, government spending actually fell in the first quarter, and that's one of the things that helped drag down the headline GDP number. So as we get the government spending down, that in turn is going to reduce the borrowing. As we grow the economy faster, we get more tax revenue. That also reduces borrowing. All of this helps put downward pressure on inflation, and then throw in all of the increase in supply that you will get from these supply side policies, again, especially increased energy production. All of that puts downward pressure on prices. You're eventually going to see not just prices stop rising, but prices falling.
Wow, that sounds like it would have to be a long ways away and a few other things, dominoes to fall before that happens. But, no one's really going out there buying the 10-year treasury. I think the way this trickles down and would affect most of the people listening is if we can get inflation under control, then you can have the Fed lower rates without inflation raging, and that could mean your mortgage rates will continue to go down because they're down for the second straight week, down to 6.76 when they were 7.22 a year ago. So I think a lot of people have sat on the sidelines in the housing market because of these higher rates. And if we see that go down, there's a whole nother incentive for an economic boom.
Right. And the really crazy thing is, to your point on how many people are sitting on the sidelines, new home sales have just absolutely plummeted. Nobody can afford a home anymore. And it's getting to the point where you're starting to see inventory build up. And normally that's fine because then prices just come down. The problem today is that the builders can't lower their prices because their costs are at a record high. They have to sell these homes at these high prices in order to make up all of those extra costs. And so they're willing to sit on the inventory, unfortunately, for a very long time because they would rather essentially try to wait and find a buyer than take a loss today. So it's a very tough situation. It's not good all around. And you're right, we got to get the spending down to get the borrowing down because reducing the borrowing puts downward pressure on that 10-year Treasury note, on the yield, I should say. And that is going to help reduce interest rates throughout the economy, regardless of what the Fed does.
Right. Your mortgage payment will be lower. Your car payment will be lower. You may even get a little bit of a break on some of your credit card rates. But, that's the trade-off. Lower interest rates also mean you get lower returns when you're investing, especially in the fixed world.
Oh, certainly. But here's the thing. If you couple those lower interest rates also with a reduction in inflation, you make out okay. What we've seen for the last several years and what we had under Biden was the worst 3.5-year run of the bond market in terms of real returns in at least 100 years. Think of that. We haven't seen bonds get that beat up in over a century. But when you had a very rise not only in inflation rates, but also a very fast rise in interest rates too, it crushed all of the folks who were holding those low interest rate securities as prices went up so quickly.
So let's circle back to the first question I asked when you started in the last segment. We were going in with the mindset, are we in a recession and we just don't know it yet? I think you spelled out a lot of good reasons why the answer should be no, but everything we're answering here comes with an asterisk because it really depends on how the people on the other side of this tariff tiff are going to respond or how long they're going to take to respond.
Exactly right. Look, as soon as you introduce these kinds of bilateral negotiations, you're introducing another element of uncertainty. There was enough uncertainty to begin with when we weren't sure exactly what Trump was going to do. But now that he's done it, now there's uncertainty in terms of how are other nations going to respond. And something that you talked about earlier with the automotive sector, right, and the fact that we're seeing all of these different exemptions, that speaks, I think, to how chaotic the rollout of these tariffs were, that they didn't put enough thought into the whole process, that they weren't looking at the parts, the components that go into final products, for example, and seeing how is that going to affect the whole mix, how is that going to affect the consumer. And so now they're having to basically build the train as they go down the tracks, and they're having to try to walk back a lot of these different provisions and create those exemptions.
Man, EJ Antoni Heritage Foundation, on days like this, I wish I worked at Fox Business. You know, they have so much to talk about, and usually it's not that the cool channel you want to be on. But in a time like this, with all the whirlwind that's been going on in the economy, what a fun job they have.
Well, I should be on with Larry Kudlow, I think at 4:30 Eastern, 3:30 Central. So you can catch me there, unless people are listening to you, in which case, they should stay with you, obviously.
Oh, yes, of course. Now, you know what? I'll have you on in the studio here. I have it on Fox Business and Fox News right now. EJ Antoni, Heritage Foundation. Good chat. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Coming up next, this is going to be a fun one. Kamala Harris had her first public speech since losing the election. And after I play you a couple of clips, you're going to be so grateful she didn't win. You're going to hear what a bullet we dodged coming up next on The James Show. It's hard to believe that Kamala Harris came close to being our president. And it's not just because she skipped the whole primary process and nobody voted for her and she was just ordained to be president. It was that whole speech thing. It was the whole vapid, empty suit thing. And I think you have forgotten, even though it's only been 6 months since she was on the news on an almost daily basis. I think you've forgotten just how bad it was. Well, she came out and had her first big public appearance since losing the election, since that whole cycle died down. And it's even worse than you remember. Let me play you a couple of clips. Stick with me here. If you have any ice picks within reaching distance, go ahead and hide them or put them in a drawer or something so you don't poke out your ears with them. But here's Kamala Harris yesterday, and tell me what she's talking about here. Just guess.
But friends, please let us not be duped into thinking everything is chaos. I know it may feel that way, but understand what we are in fact witnessing is a high-velocity event.
What does that even mean?
Where a vessel is being used.
A vessel?
For the swift implementation of an agenda that has been decades in the making.
Tepid applause there. Is she reading a Mad Lib? Or was she trying to describe a situation that's happening in contemporary times? I mean, she just throws in a random noun. What we're dealing with is a vessel. Okay. This is a high velocity situation. What does that even mean? I don't know if it's a Mad Lib or she went to the Chinese buffet. And something magic happens when the Parker family goes to the Chinese buffet, because there's 6 of us, I have 4 kids. So we get 6 fortune cookies. And if you smash them all at the same time and you line them up back to back and just read them in whatever order, that's kind of what it would sound like, right? Is this 6 fortune cookies strung together? Is this a Parker fortune cookie?
But friends, please let us not be duped into thinking everything is chaos.
That could be a fortune cookie.
I know it may feel that way, but understand what we are in fact witnessing is a high-velocity event.
That could be another fortune cookie.
Where a vessel is being used for the swift implementation.
I can't do it. All right, we'll go to the next one. She's adopted the constitutional crisis line. I'm not going to play the montage, but we have 400 people saying constitutional crisis, constitutional crisis, constitutional crisis, constitutional crisis. Got it.
We are living in a moment when the checks and balances upon which we have historically relied have begun to buckle. And we here know that when the checks and balances ultimately collapse, if Congress fails to do its part, or if the courts fail to do their part, or if both do their part, but the president defies them anyway, well, friends, that is called a constitutional crisis. And that is a crisis that will eventually impact everyone. Because it would mean that the rules that protect our fundamental rights and freedoms.
All right, I can't do this. The thing that's really bothering me about the constitutional crisis, just the herd of lemmings that are just repeating constitutional crisis, is they never give you what part of the Constitution are we contravening. Oh, yeah, the checks and balances. Yeah, but I mean, Article 1, Section 8, the Third Amendment. What are you talking about? What is it? The necessary and proper clause, general welfare clause, the preamble, something. No, we just, orange man bad, constitutional crisis, threat to democracy. Okay, but what part of the Constitution? What are you citing there? Like if I was reffing a football game and I'd say, okay, well, I threw the flag. Yeah, we have a penalty there. What's the penalty for? Holding. There's a statute, a penalty written in the rule books against holding. That's what it is. But for constitutional crisis, trust me. Your source, what's your source on that one? Trust me, bro. The one that's actually getting a lot of play here and being floated around, just because it's a silly metaphor, is the elephant one. You'll probably see this in your social media on X or Facebook or Instagram or whatever later today. I didn't find this very compelling just because it's another nothing.
Video from a couple of weeks ago, the one of the elephants at the San Diego Zoo during the earthquake. Google it if you've not seen it.
No, I'm not going to Google it. I'll take your word for it.
So that scene has been on my mind. Everybody's asking me what you've been thinking about these days. Well,
you been thinking about elephants? What are you laughing at?
So in the video, for those who haven't seen it,
she's laughing, but there's no punchline.
And as soon as they felt the earth shaking beneath their feet, they got in a circle and stood next to each other.
It's hilarious.
To protect the most vulnerable.
Oh, I got it.
Think about it. What a powerful metaphor.
Yeah, that's so powerful. The problem is you didn't say anything. It's like in Cheers.
Kevin Fogarty, City Council. I hope I have your vote on Election Day.
And why exactly should I vote for you, Mr. Fogarty?
Well, because I'm a hard worker, I take a stand.
On what exactly?
The issues of the day.
Which are?
The things that concern you and your family the most.
I think you're making it out of yourself. I am not. I simply want the councilman to say one concrete thing.
Yes, I understand. You don't trust me. A lot of people don't trust politicians. I know how it is. I have been out there.
What does that have to do with
it? Finish, please.
I've been out there.
Maybe we need someone to blame. Maybe if we pick some faceless person at City Hall to be responsible for all our problems, then we won't have to accept any responsibility at all. Well, people, I say now is the time to start looking in the mirror. Because if this thing is going to work, we are all going to have to make it work. The way a bunch of people made something work at Lexington and Concord. You may remember it. It's called America.
Yes! But he didn't say anything!
Oh, God, that's exactly how I felt when I was watching that for you. All right, coming up next, we're going to do another episode of What Did Jasmine Crockett Say This Time? 800-288-9227, 800-288-9227. There's two clips, and you're also going to get a bonus clip from Ilhan Omar. Coming up next on The James Show, I'm James Parker. It's News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3.